David Close, welcome.
Is there a council staff member to take the papers? It's also on a memory stick. Okay. Well, good morning. Thank you for having me here. As I said in my written submission, well done on the annual plan. You've knocked the capital program into shape, which means that the council's finances are on so much better footing. And well done too on all those numerous policies you have which resist the trend towards inequality, which is so apparent in New Zealand society. But what I really want to say this morning is that you have a huge opportunity in this council to take a much bigger step to redress that shocking trend to inequality. It's an unprecedented opportunity that you have in housing. Interest rates are at an historic low. And what's more, we have a very vigorous building industry which is beginning to show some surplus capacity. And the combination of historically low interest rates and the developing capacity in the building industry and the development of new techniques and systems for building, I think gives you the opportunity to make a real contribution to housing in Christchurch. This council could go down in history as the council that turned round housing in Christchurch for low-income people. And as a New Zealand citizen, I've got to say I'm ashamed that we have homelessness in our city. When I was a child, our society was much less wealthy than it is today. And now, in the midst of our wealth, we have homelessness. And I find that quite shocking. I thank God that the City Council is still there with its social housing, which is at arm's length these days. But in the last year or so, I've been able to get a couple of people who were sleeping rough in New Brighton into City Council housing. So thank you for that. My proposition this morning is very simple. Just let me get it. It's based on the muffin principle. Here I have a small muffin on my left, which cost me 81 cents, and a big muffin on my right, which cost $2.50. My proposition is simply this. If ratepayers in Christchurch contributed each week the equivalent of one muffin, either a small muffin if you have a small house or a big muffin if you have a big house, if they contribute the equivalent of that, that would produce $9 million a year from 174,000 rating properties. And that $9 million a year would be sufficient to fund the development of 1,500 one and two bedroom units over 6 years. I've put those facts out simply in this little model which has come round. You've got it now? And you can see on the first page the assumptions which I make about this building program. 1 and 2 bedroom flats, 96% occupancy, $185 a week rent, design and build contracts to council specifications. Design and build is much cheaper than one-off systems. Use major builders to achieve economies of scale. Cost per unit, $200,000 if, as in the case of Borum Street, you already own the land, up to $300,000 if you've got to buy the land. At, say, an average of $250,000. If you think that's unrealistic, let me tell you that major builders are building 100 square metre houses, en suite and all the rest of it, for $260,000. That's about 2,600 per square metre. You'd have to ramp it up to about, say, 3,300 per square metre for smaller units. But it's certainly achievable with the techniques which they have and the economies of scale which they get from a continuous program of building. Loan servicing, I've allowed 5.5% for interest and repayments. I think the council is paying a bit less than that at present, probably about 5.2%, but interest rates are going up a bit, so I've allowed 5.5%. From the rent of $185 a week, I'm suggesting $120 to go towards loan servicing. That may be a fraction low. Over the next page, you can see a simple model of how this would work. The first line, the capital cost, you spend $62.5 million each year to build 250 units at $250,000. And you notice the next line, the cumulative borrowing, it goes up to $375 million by the end of year 6. The number of units built, 250 in year 1, and you get to completion 1,500 by year 6. Loan servicing, 3.48 million year 1, rising to a maximum of 20.6 million in year 6. How do you fund that loan servicing? Well, contribution from rents, $120 a week, and that starts at 1.5 million in year 2 and rises to just over 10 million by year 7. And then the rate contribution, the muffin per week, from a muffin per week from each ratepayer, on average $9 million a year. There's the bottom line, which shows you the outcome for each particular year. As I said before, the contribution from rates at $120 a week is a bit light, I think. It probably needs to go up to start at 130, and I think that would make the whole program more viable into the future and mean that the muffin contribution could go into other units. As I said before, I think this is a huge opportunity. I think this council has got the courage and the ability to seize that opportunity and take it. If you think it's too big and it's too difficult, let me tell you that the Citizens' Council, which was running the city in the years before, immediately before I was elected, launched onto a huge building program, and they built about 200 or 300 units a year for about 4 years. It took a wee bit longer than they'd originally planned because they bought up a lot of land, and it did take maybe about 5 years, but they were building at about 200 a year. I see no reason why we couldn't achieve that same sort of thing again. I believe this is something which would enable this council really to make its mark, not only here in Christchurch, but in New Zealand as a whole. This model is a very simple model. I kept it simple, it hasn't got too much sophistication in it, but I think it's fundamentally sound, and I urge you to give it very serious consideration. Ratepayers don't respond very readily to rate increases, but I think there would be hardly a ratepayer in Christchurch who wouldn't be prepared to pay the equivalent of a muffin per week. You'd raise it on the general rate, which means that a person in a small house would pay for a small muffin, and a person in a very big house would pay for a big muffin. I think it's perfectly fair and reasonable, and if the council spends money, as I said in my written submission, on things like golf tournaments, which help economic development, or on heritage buildings, or symphony orchestras, or whatever, then I see no reason why there shouldn't be a modest contribution from rates in this way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, that's the allocated time, but thank you very much for the submission. I mean, we've got. We do have to keep moving, so I'm sorry.
Yes,
about
I understand the time constraints. Perhaps I might have a chance to speak to the Housing Committee sometime.
I think that would be a very good idea, because I suspect that some of the submissions that we're receiving will be more better considered in the context of the long-term plan rather than just the annual plan for 1 year.
I fully recognise that, Madam Chair, but I do think we have to recognise that we're in an unprecedented situation in New Zealand with our housing crisis, and it really needs action pretty promptly, and I would think a special consultative procedure on a proposal like this might be quite reasonable. And
it may well be that is the case. But you know, in terms of the annual plan process, we are making adjustments to the 2017-18 annual plan, yes. And it may well be that a special consultative procedure would precipitate something like this. It would certainly be required, but then that could potentially wrap itself into the LTP process, which is the equivalent. But anyway, thank you very much, and you've obviously given it considerable thought too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.